Good evening and welcome to the City of Fort Lauderdale Historic Preservation Board. I want to call the meeting to order.
I think you have to do the vote for the minutes first, and then I can do the swearing.
We're approving the minutes.
Aye.
Aye, the minutes are approved. And now we'll swear in anyone who is going to speak. The city attorney will.
Can you please stand and raise your right hand if you're going to speak to the board today?
For you, so we just
That
want a
makes
little-
sense, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So for you, so we just
That
want
makes,
to please.
okay. Okay, anybody have a motion here to defer? And is there a second?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Excellent. Thank you so
we will see
much.
you next month.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next we have, sorry, too much paper on the desk here. Case number UDP HP 2302.
Process, so it's not complete. Process, so it's not complete, but
So it's because you did not get a permit?
that's correct, yes.
Okay,
So we're in we have a permit application, and part of that step is to come here and
okay.
get approval from the board.
Chair, would you like to hear the staff report?
Yes, we would, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Thank you.
And IT, could you bring up the PowerPoint and go to the second
I know.
page?
I'll get that.
This item is a certificate of appropriateness for major alteration for after-the-fact installation of a 6-foot-high horizontal wood plank fence in the front yard. The property is located at 825 Southwest 4th Street in the Sailboat Bend Historic District. Typically, and outlined in our historic preservation design guidelines, we allow up to 3 feet high in the front yard, a picket-style fence or a fence that's wood with spacing, so there's visibility into the front yard. So generally, a 6-foot-high privacy fence in the front yard is not something that the board has accepted in the past and doesn't agree with our design guidelines. It does, however, agree with part of our material and design guidelines for the Sailboat Bend Historic District, which does allow wood as an option, but it does not specifically say horizontal plank. So with that, staff finds that the application for a certificate of appropriateness for major alterations under case number UDP-HP 23022, located at 825 Southwest 4th Street, does not meet the criteria as outlined in section 472411 D3CI of the ULDR, does not meet the criteria as outlined in section 472411 D3CII of the ULDR, and partially meets the criteria as outlined in section 4717 of the ULDR. If the board is considering approval of this application, there are a couple of conditions that are outlined within the staff report on page 3. The first condition says the portion of fencing proposed to be 6 feet in height on the south and western property lines located in the front of the primary facade is not approved as part of this application and is limited to a height of 3 feet. And 2, this application is subject to the approval by building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements, including landscaping.
Why don't you explain
No problem.
how you got to this point?
Okay, okay. I had technically considered this a modification of a repair of the previous fence. If you look behind the panels, we use the same wood poles, the same fence line, except in 2 spaces, and we replaced the horizontal pickets with, or the vertical pickets with horizontal pickets. You know,
Okay.
I purchased a property in April 2021, and the existing 6-foot fence was badly damaged. It was totally, so you can see further into the packet, there are several photos of what the fence looked like when I purchased the property and what the fence looked like over the past several years. up to that point. The permit for that original fence showing the outline that was changed is also in there, so you can see where I changed the outline of the fence. The only thing that we did replace was timbers that were rotted. So there was a few poles that were rotted. Those were replaced in place, and the fence changed from a swinging gate to a sliding gate, and then the corner was at a 45, and I squared it off. So those are the parts that are new. That's the reason why I didn't pull a permit. When I got the citation from the code enforcement, the gentleman explained to me that Broward County ordinance requires even a quote repair to have a fence permit. So at that point, went through the permitting process, which was then, I guess, somewhere in that permitting process, it was requiring an approval from the board.
Right.
And then, as the staff report suggests, it doesn't fit the criteria for a administrative approval, so now I'm here.
After a year. Okay.
Right.
You have a lot of pictures in here that aren't marked. What are these, neighboring fences?
No, that's the fence that was there before.
The vertical ones, the vertical pictures.
Yeah, that's the
Right,
fence that was
okay.
there before, sir. Yes.
Any comments?
You want to comment from the public first?
I have
Any comments?
You want to comment from the public first?
Wait,
comment.
One thing I do want to say, just, sorry,
yes. Please.
is that's a photo, and I agree, it doesn't look so nice in that photo, but I did get a stop work order, so to finish the job would be not necessarily what I should be doing, right? So I don't know if you have access to the permit application, but like I think there's Collusia bushes.
So
ground cover.
landscaping in front of it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's on the permit application, as well as the ground cover and the swale and around the.
So would the clusia grow up high enough?
Yeah,
cover the fence?
yeah,
It could.
you could even buy ones that are probably high enough.
Right.
Depending on what we decide, I guess.
And how much you want to spend? on it.
Right, right,
Okay.
right.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I just wanted to point that out before.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone from the public wish to speak on this matter? If not, we'll now go to board comments.
Okay. Just to be clear, this is a non-contributing property, correct? And I don't live in the neighborhood, I did not drive by it, but fences have come before us many times, and I totally think that 6 foot is almost a necessity in today's.
The horizontal plane.
Okay, all right, so I'm just bringing those points out. We had one other fence here a couple of years
We've
back where
had
they had a
many-
real.
many more
They had a
than
real
one other,
problem with
yeah.
people climbing over it, so
Right.
we approved that from a security standpoint. But in the interest of just what we're trying to do right now, I don't have any problem with the fence as is and to be finished as it is. That's just my 2 cents.
I just wanted to put my 2 cents in before I
4 foot. How did a 6-foot fence end up there in the first place?
It may have been installed prior to our current design guidelines.
It was permitted in 2013.
Yeah, and the existing citywide design guidelines, I think, were created in 2014 or 15.
Yeah.
But
I think one of the prevailing factors for me in this particular application is that there was a 6-foot fence.
And there is an increased fee with building permitting as well.
Okay. Well, I do know that there are a lot of fences in Seattle Bend that are all over the board with the styles and height. And a lot of that has to do with they were there already installed prior to the district being dedicated historic district. And these rules were put in after those fences were installed. The repair and replace, what percentage of the fence is?
Appreciated how you shared with us your perspective. And Tricia, I understand how you've laid out where you are, and Arthur, if we could get to the point where we did have some uniformity going forward around this issue, I think it would make sense. So my only last question is, are we okay with horizontal? Is that what we, the board?
We have been in the past,
Okay,
even though it's not in the Sailboat Bend ordinance and it's higher than 4 feet, 3 feet actually.
Right.
Because 3 feet is what it's in the code.
We have approved horizontal.
Yeah, we have.
Fences since I've been on the board, and I've only been here for maybe 3 months. So we have definitely had a couple that have come before us that are horizontal.
And I can tell you in the 3-4 years I've been on the board or more, probably more, we've had innumerable issues like this come up. And I thought we had, I guess, the ordinance has to be changed. Is that what it is?
Well, the Sailboat Bend Historic District Ordinance, it's a change in location, change in location of the gate for the drive aisle and elimination of the pedestrian gate, then that becomes a full replacement in our review. And it does need to comply under our review with the current guidelines and code requirements.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I'd like to motion to approve the resolution for a certificate of appropriateness for major alterations under case number UDP HP 23022 located at 825 Southwest 4th Street based on the following findings of fact, based on the facts and findings as outlined in the staff memorandum, and is subject to the following conditions, that this application is subject to the approval by building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements, including landscaping.
Okay.
Second.
Is there,
Well, wait,
Tim seconded? Okay.
So,
so
so,
just to be clear, that means that it has to be 3 feet rather than 6 feet, because that's what
No.
number one
No.
says.
Well, I only wanted to make it subject to number 2, an existing fence that is already at 6 feet height. And I would also say, security concerns that was also previously mentioned on the record.
okay. And then the bottom part of page 2, it does say that it partially meets. Did you want to include that as well? The material?
And that's as it relates to the horizontal nature of the fence, that it partially meets?
Yes.
Sure, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
And
Sorry
you-
about that, I'm
Oh,
learning.
No problem. Do you have anything to add to that or no?
I'll second this second.
Okay. You did second it, yes. All right. Let's go through, let's have a roll call.
Mr. Bray?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
yes.
Mr. Chavon?
Yes.
Ms. Walker?
Yes.
And Chair Marcus?
I'm voting no only because everybody else voted yes, but also I have a concern about the issue of precedence, as I've always raised in these kinds of cases, and I'm hoping somehow we can get some resolution to this so we don't put the board in such free fall all the time.
But I think with that, we need to review the rules and regulations, because
Oh, yeah,
it does
yeah.
become not equal when you start to approve some and you don't start to
Of
approve other
course.
people. So that gets to be a problem for all of us.
Okay. Thank you and good luck.
Agree.
Thank you.
Okay. And next, we have case number UDP HP 23024, 700 Northwest 4th Street. Tricia?
Do you have any disclosures? Would you like to check?
I was going to do that afterwards, but any disclosures? No?
No.
No.
Been
No.
by the property many times.
Okay.
Okay, this is a certificate of appropriateness application for demolition of a 2-story single-family residence in the Sailboat Bend Historic District. This property was identified as non-contributing in the most recent architectural resource survey due to the multiple alterations that have occurred to the property over time. And at this time, the applicant is only requesting demolition and not any new construction. So in reviewing the criteria, the general criteria, the application meets all of the criteria listed. And in reviewing the criteria for demolition, the application meets the first criteria, which is the designated landmark site, or property within the historic district no longer contributes to a historic district, and that is because of the alterations that have occurred to this property. D4 of the ULDR. The board needs to make a motion for approval with conditions or denial. And if the board would like to consider this application for approval, there are a couple of conditions that are outlined within the staff report between page 3 and 4. First is the demolition of the structure shall not negatively impact properties within the historic district, and protection from construction debris and construction equipment shall be provided as necessary. 2, this property is located in an archaeologically significant zone, and a Phase 1 archaeological survey by a qualified professional is required. The completed survey must be submitted and reviewed by preservation staff prior to building permit application for demolition. Following the review of the completed survey, additional archaeological testing or monitoring comments may apply. And there's a letter that was attached from the city's archaeological consultant. I'm not sure if it made it into your staff or your board packets, the non-digital version. And third, the application is subject to the approval by building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements, including landscaping.
Thank you. Is anyone here representing the project? Sorry, I turned on the mic.
Good evening, I'm Robert Wolf. I'm here representing the Jordan Meyer residents. Our request is for demolition of a 2-story single-family residence identified as non-contributing property, Silva Bend Historic District.
Why is the building being torn down?
There's a number of I'd say severely damaged areas to the structure due to termite and water damage over the years.
Okay.
And it's just beyond anything that can, reasonably be repaired.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to say, or? Okay.
If you have any other
I'm
questions.
sure we may have some questions.
Okay.
Okay. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak? Please. He'll have to speak at the microphone.
Yeah, hello, everybody. My name is Ted Insera. And, I've been by, I made site visits here. This place is just beautiful. I mean, there's got to be at least 20 beautiful royal palms there. And I don't see how you can approve a demolition of this before you know what's going to be built there. I mean, in my opinion, they're just, what do we know what they're going to do with the land? I mean, this is in such a beautiful location, right on the water, right next to Cooley, the massacre site. So that's such a small little street. I don't see how you're going to be able to get in there with all this demolition equipment and not do damage to the property or to surrounding properties. I mean, it's a very narrow little street. And, it's called in the beginning, right in the gate, it says Shangri-La. And, I Googled Shangri-La and it said heaven on earth. So, of course, City of Fort Lauderdale says, let's tear it down, because, just like we have with many other historic sites and parks and things in our city that make it great. We want new, shiny, bubbly, oh my gosh, something just doesn't seem right when we want to tear it down before we know what's going to go there. That's my opinion. Thank you.
And to that point, thank you. Do we know what's going to go here?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to speak to that a little bit. So the point of, this evening is to get an approval on demolition so that we can then hire an architect and move forward with the new construction submittals to the board for approval.
What are you planning to build there?
Another two-story residence.
Okay.
And it would be with that period. So it would be a very similar home. It would.
In
it
the
would
same
then-
style as the
Yes, sir.
period?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And I mean, to your point on, there's all different sizes of construction equipment to do the demolition. And so we would obviously be mindful of that, during that whole process where we, because we have engineering permits involved. And so we can't damage any of the street or surrounding buildings or anything like that. So.
No, you can't, you can't, just, sorry about that. Okay.
If I could speak to the landscaping, it would obviously,
Please.
it would all go through landscaping review, and we would get approvals on all that as well.
Okay, thank you.
And that's all part of the demolition permitting process also. Landscape does review it, so.
Okay. With that, let's start with board comments. Alan?
A question. Can you tell us a little bit more about the damage to the existing home, the structural, the termite?
Yeah, so this is a combination of CMU construction and wood frame construction. And the areas that we've explored, through removing some drywall areas inside the house, there's just, it's so far gone. I mean, there's areas of the structure that are just completely rotted away, and there's like literally stucco holding it together. And it was built, seems that it was built first in 1941, and then there's another 1955 date. I guess there were some additions done to it, but none of the construction here conforms to today's building code. So you're dealing with like 2x4 studs on this house, and today, if you did wood frame, it would be 2x6, and so there's no way to even have engineering done and kind of like retrofit this house with today's standards.
Does anyone I think I asked if anyone from the public has anything to say. Alan, you spoke. Do you have any more questions?
Arthur, I don't think I heard that. I don't know if you officially
Oh.
asked and then closed it, so.
I
if there was
did,
any-
I did ask, and then
Okay.
there was no one else.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
No problem. Because then we had Alan speak.
Okay.
Okay. Tim?
Is anybody living in that property now?
Yes, sir.
Yes?
Yeah, the owners are, yeah.
And they plan on staying there after they demolish it and build a new home?
Nobody would be living, it would be a complete demolition, so.
But I mean, when they rebuild, do you know if their
Oh,
plan
yeah.
is
the
to
same
stay
o-
there?
Yes, the current owners are going to build a new home there and to live there.
And it's a non-contributing property, Tricia?
Yes.
And your staff has pretty much given a green light to almost everything on this? Meets the criteria in most cases,
With conditions.
with
Correct.
conditions? But there isn't one definitive no, does not meet property building no law, because it's not applicable, because it's not historic. So where it does not meet the conditions is because it is not a contributing.
It's after
property.
1940.
It's non-contributing, right.
Well, there
So-
was an updated architectural resource survey a couple of years ago, which was recommended for approval by the Historic Preservation Board and approved as a resolution by the City Commission, which outlined all the properties within the Sailboat Bend Historic District as contributing or non-contributing. This property was identified as non-contributing within that report, and that information is being conveyed within the staff report.
Okay, so just to be clear, if we were to approve the demolition then has to go through a lot of hoops to get any equipment down there to just make sure because we've done this so many times, they can't disturb the next door neighbor's property, tear things up.
Well,
They have
the building
a lot of
department
hoops to
has all
jump
those
through.
caveats.
And as far as what they're going to build, that's not going to happen until it comes back before the board again.
Right.
That's going to be to our approval as well. So you're, the owner is aware of the fact that if this does come down, they aren't going to just throw something new up
Yeah.
without any consideration from this board, so that it works with the rest of the neighborhood.
We wouldn't demolish the house without approval on new construction.
Right. Yeah, I'm just clarifying all that.
So
So
it's understood.
the neighbors aren't concerned, understand that. Thank you. That's it.
Alan? I'm sorry, Richard.
Yeah, I have some questions, I guess. The house was originally built in 1941, changed in 1955, and then again in 2006 and 2012. That's what I've kind of got somewhere along the notes. So that's why it's not contributing? Because I see a lot of properties that have changed numerous times since they were built in the 30s and 40s. So what, just like the police station, what is about it that you decided it was non-contributing versus contributing?
Well, when there are alterations that obscure what the original intent of the architecture was and the original design, then that's when there's cause for it to be identified as non-contributing.
Because it's hard to see from the picture, the original drawings versus what we see in the color picture, how much has changed. And so that's why I'm like, well, there's plenty of houses in Sailboat Bend that you've even designated as contributing that from the 50s and even from 1951 to 1961. So even if the changes were from 1955, I'm not really sure how the subjective opinion was established that this was not contributing when it was originally started in 1941.
Yeah, as mentioned, this, the report, the Architectural Resource Survey report, did come before the Historic Preservation Board for review and was recommended for approval to the City Commission and was approved by the City Commission by a resolution. And so if there were a discrepancy, that it wasn't identified at that time. So
Well, I think there
those
were numerous objections before that was passed, but I mean, you have to go back to the process retroactive and try to
Well,
object to
and
it.
all properties within the Sailboat Bend Historic District still have to come before the Historic Preservation Board for review of the demolition application. The staff report is conveying the information that was included within the survey report.
Okay. And I'm assuming the house does not meet current flood standards, and that's part of the reason that you're having this damage or problems as well with the house.
Yeah, correct.
All right. So what I see as, and part of the discussion that's coming up with the Public Works, is that because of the seawall and the rising waters and the rain, and it's not meeting those standards, that it's almost necessary to tear down these houses to make it livable for people longer term, because they will continue to deteriorate. Being that this property is next to Cooley's Landing, and until the city raises the seawall there, then even if this property does raise their seawall, the water will come around and onto their property. So they would have to make sure that their walls are high enough not to allow that water to come in and intrude on their property. So I'm feeling that because of these issues, that it feels like it's almost necessary for them to be able to improve their property and live there, to have a standard of use of the property, you'd have to allow this.
Okay.
It's been a very thorough discussion, and so I agree with a lot that's already been said, so I don't have anything to add.
Okay. I have a few comments. I'm really disappointed that our process would first identify this building as non-contributing when it has the roots in the community. And I've always found that termite damage or water damage, now, maybe not water damage that is ongoing like this, that is not the cause of the homeowners, but in historic structures, things can be repaired. And I think there's too often a route to take where people say, oh, there's too much work, I can't do it. But I
The
think there's some
condition wasn't considered as part of the condition of the structure as far as termite
realize that.
damage or anything.
Well,
was not considered.
I was going on two routes. One was, it is possible to repair a facade and tear down an addition, and as long as you have the original drawings, you can reconstruct it. What I was really disappointed in was that because it missed the Sailboat Bend designation by 1 year, there was no grace period, so to speak, in terms of letting this be a contributing building since it once was, or once was considered a contributing building. All I'm saying is for the future, I think we need to look at this more historically. And I know, Tricia, you're doing a yeoman's job there, but it's disappointing when something like this seems to fall through the cracks. So with that, we'll have a vote. So please call the roll.
First, we need
Oh,
a
we need a
motion.
motion. Let's have a motion. Not my day.
All right, I'll motion to approve the resolution for certificate of appropriateness for demolition under case number UDP HP 23024, located at 700 Southwest 4th Place, based on the following findings. And I can go through and read the 4 points that Trish laid out, and I think that all of those are probably appropriate, so I think you can just duplicate those without me repeating them.
It's up to you. If you want to say based on the findings of fact in the staff
Okay.
report, you
Yeah.
can. I just wanted to,
Okay,
you
and
know,
that's how I'll leave it.
yeah.
And it's subject to the conditions that are also laid out in the report.
You don't
Second.
want to include the ones towards the end, right, that say it doesn't meet criteria?
No.
Because they're not applicable? Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure. And subject to the conditions in there?
Yes.
All of them? Okay.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Yeah.
Mr. Bray?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Chavon?
Yes.
Ms. Walker?
Yes.
And Chair Marcus?
No.
4-1 passed.
Thank you. Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Okay, our next application is UDPHP 23025, 915 Southwest Second Court. I see someone is here to speak. Please introduce yourself. You can put the mic lower.
There you go.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Stephanie Wedgeworth, and I'm here with my fiance, Gary Musachuk. And we live at 915 Southwest Second Court, also known as 915 Middle Street. And we are here today to ask permission to elevate our home that was severely damaged in the April floods on April 12th. This was probably the 4th time that it's gotten to the point. 3 other times before this time, our home has almost flooded.
Wow.
The waters have risen pretty much to what you guys see in those pictures. April 12th was the first time where the water breached inside the house. So we had 26 and a half inches outside and over 10 inches inside the house, inside the entire house. And it damaged the house severely. It is a old historic 110-year-old house or so, and it's wood frame, and we can no longer live there. And it's, we are on the border of where you are required to have flood insurance. So, but we did have it, but it's not livable in the state that it's in. The recommendation that has been given to us after we talked to architects and builders and people who came to give us assessments on how to repair the house said that we'd be crazy not to elevate it because it's probably going to happen again.
yeah.
And any repairs that we'll do are just going to get destroyed. We were already in the middle of 2/3 done renovating the inside of the house when this happened. So we don't want to go through that again. So this time we're going to just bite the bullet and would like permission to elevate the home. And in your package, you'll see the designs of what it would look like.
Okay.
Am I forgetting anything? Okay.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Do you want to do the disclosures?
Yes. Are there any disclosures? No.
None.
None, thank you.
And by the property many times.
Well, you live in the neighborhood, so yes, okay. And does anyone in the public have something to say on this matter? If not, we'll go to board comment.
Would you like any staff report?
Oh, I think we would like the staff report. I know,
Stephanie did a great job of outlining her request.
I know.
This is an application, a certificate of appropriateness application for major alterations to elevate the existing structure approximately 4 feet off the ground, demolish the existing carport, build a new entry porch and stair, and build a new rear deck and stair. The application meets all of our criteria, and staff utilize the National Park Service guidelines for rehabilitating historic buildings and the flood adaptation guidelines that are provided by them to review this application. We don't have specific criteria within our code that speaks to elevating historic structures at this time, so that was an additional resource that was added and is identified within the staff report. Any of the materials that they are proposing to use also meet our regulations as well. And with that, staff finds that the application for a certificate of appropriateness for major alterations under case number UDP-HP 23025, located at 915 Southwest Second Court, meets the criteria as outlined in section 472411 D3CI and section 472411 D3CII and 4717. The board must make a determination on this application with a motion of approval, motion for approval with conditions, or a motion of denial. And if the board is considering adopting a motion for approval, there are several conditions that are outlined within the staff report for the consideration of the board. The first is repairs to the existing structure, including any required replacement wood clapboard siding, must match the existing and material texture, size, etc. And 2, the landscaping shall be placed in front of the mechanical equipment to screen it from view and reduce visibility. The third is color of stucco foundation should be painted a darker color from the existing house to better blend in with the original building foundation. And 4, landscaping should be placed in front of the new elevated foundation to assist in screening the change in height. And 5, provide additional dimensions of the existing structure at the time of permitting to document the existing conditions. And 6, this property is located in an archaeologically significant zone, and a Phase 1 archaeological survey by a qualified professional is required. The completed survey must be submitted and reviewed by preservation staff prior to building permit application for demolition, or sorry, not demolition, elevation. Following the review of the completed survey, additional archaeological testing or monitoring comments may apply, and there is an attached letter from the city's archaeological consultant providing more information. And 7, this application is subject to the approval by building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements, including landscaping.
Thank you. Just one comment. Do you agree with the 7 points in the minutes here? Or do you have any concerns about any of them?
I do have concerns about the archaeological study, because when we purchased that home in 2016, there was no indication that our home sat on an archaeological significant zone. Nobody ever said that. It's, when you look up the property, it's not like tagged or anything that says, hey, you're buying a house that's on an archaeological significant zone. So this is the first time we ever learned about that. So that's a concern for me as to anything that's going to prevent us from doing this or delay us in doing this, because we are homeless right now. So that's a concern for us.
I'm going to have Tricia answer that question about the archaeological
Yeah, and
requirements.
Stephanie and I have
I know,
been
she has
going back
that.
and
She
forth.
has it right, okay. But I mean, from the board.
Yeah, so, go ahead.
I just pulled up the City of Fort Lauderdale's official map, and it does not have that property designated, or it does not look like it. It's hard to tell, I guess, but it's,
It's on the northern end
yeah.
of the
Yeah, it
area.
would be on the cusp, is what I would say, if
Yeah.
it falls in, because the map doesn't really show it very well. And so I would agree with Stephanie, I don't think it's probably necessary. I would take that point out.
Yeah, our archaeological consultant, who previously worked for Broward County for quite some time, and now is our consultant with the city, Matt DeFelice, reviewed the property and made the recommendations that are included in the staff report as far as the necessity to have an archaeological survey. The initial survey to identify the areas was conducted between 1991 to 1994 by Broward County. And at that time, these areas were identified. And for a long time, that was reviewed by Broward County. And anything that was a necessity to have archaeological review was commented on and asked for by the preservation staff at Broward County. In 2017, when I started, then things shifted over to the city of Fort Lauderdale, and that's when different processes were incorporated as far as the review from the city's end rather than from the county.
So the real question is, what triggers an archaeological review?
Well, first, the location in an archaeologically significant zone, and that's determined by those maps that were created in the 1990s. And then we have our boundaries of those maps that are provided by Broward County. And that information came from them.
Okay. But in this case, you said, now let's talk about this
So then
case.
Matt DeFelice will take the location and the data that is, that he has from those previous surveys, and as well as his knowledge, extensive knowledge of Broward County and the archaeological resources that we have here, and makes a recommendation as far as what should be concerned as far as testing and monitoring for the archaeological area.
So I guess I just want to get a notice that it's required on this property, or is it optional?
So within our code, we do have a couple of things that talk about archaeological review. One states that any development permit, which would include certificates of appropriateness, does require archaeological review when it's going through a process. So any of our projects that go through our development review committee, we review them to make sure, they're in archaeological areas or not, and then make further recommendations as far as what is required of them. And then with the Historic Preservation Board as well. And then within our criteria for review of historic properties, within the main section of the Historic Preservation Ordinance, it does talk about the effect of the proposed project on the archaeological resource. So it's in response to that as well.
So I have a follow-up question to that. So is it within the map, or is it right outside the map and the staffer recommended it? It's unclear to me on what is.
It is within the map.
And is that the same answer you had received previously?
Yeah, I mean, she
Okay.
explained that to me before. It's just strange to me that you can own a house and you don't know that, and nobody tells you that. So it should be clear in my mind when you are purchasing a house, and if you get added later, it should be clear, something should be sent to you that says,
Sure.
hey, you're in this zone, so.
Agreed.
Can I ask another follow-up?
Of course.
Tricia, I've never had to get an archaeological study. What does a study like that cost? And the study falls on the homeowner, correct?
The study falls on the homeowner.
So
yeah.
what is the cost of that study, and what is
Since
the?
it's an outside consultant, I can't specifically say what the cost would be because it's determined by the scope of work, the size of the project, and the amount of time that the archaeologist believes it would take.
And who determines that scope of work, meaning?
So the archaeology consultant, Matt DeFelice, makes a recommendation on the scope of the study and what would be needed to fulfill the requirements. And then the outside consultant that's acquired by the property owner would, they would review that letter, and sometimes it's more of a conversation after that where, the other consultant may say, you know what, like we think this should be in addition, or we'd like to try this methodology instead because they've come to the site and are reviewing something in person. But archaeology review is generally only done when there is a demolition, new construction, or some sort of major alteration that requires a lot of ground disturbing work.
Right.
We've required it numerous times by the Historic Preservation Board and the Development Review Committee for testing and monitoring of archaeology. And this is part of our requirements as a certified local government, that we continue to investigate these areas.
Thank you, Tricia. Go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead.
so I'm sorry to
No,
nag
go.
on this. I'm just, so like, given your expert opinion, what it would, like, is this tens of thousands of dollars? Is this thousands of dollars, hundreds of dollars? Like, what is I have no idea. I've never even, I mean, Richard, do you know? Have you had to?
I've had to do 2.
Okay.
And I don't believe that they required residential properties to do it until 2012. So this is relatively new, like in the last 10 years that the city had started to require this. They do cost thousands of dollars depending on the details, as Trish is pointing out, of what they find and the size of the property, but it is thousands of dollars.
And Richard, do you have a thought on the length of time? So we've talked about the cost, but if you are out of your home, that's as big of an issue probably.
It could delay it depending on the timetable for finding an archaeologist to do it and the amount of work that's required once they start. So, I mean, that it's a little bit variable. It's kind of hard to give a direct answer to that. But, they're already out of their house, so it would be delaying it a little bit further as a result.
I feel like, we often have discussions at this board meeting about like encouraging historic preservation, encouraging homeowners to come forward. And given, Richard, what you've talked about, I mean, this is the second home tonight that we've seen that has significant issues due to flooding, and that seems to be a very pervasive problem within the historic district that obviously needs attention way beyond the scope and purview of this board. But I do feel like this homeowner is trying to preserve the property. I'm not sure what all is entailed in elevating a property, but it seems from the pictures included in our support packet that it maintains the integrity and the historical significance and the architectural integrity of the building, which I think is exactly what we would be encouraging homeowners to do. I mean, I think there was a question maybe by you, Arthur, of the last homeowner of like, can you fix it? Can you? And that's essentially what this homeowner is trying to do. Yeah. And so I think that should be something that we are applauding as a board and encouraging. I do, considering that the homeowner is out of their home and probably incurring additional costs to living in a second place as somebody that just was out of my home for 9 months. So I would be okay with the conditions that are included in the staff report and with excluding the architectural study, given, as Richard had said, this is on the edge. And this is something that, will further delay them from being in their home.
Before we do that, can we even do that? Because it's required by.
Well, it is part of our requirements that it needs
Right.
to be reviewed. I would discourage the board from completely removing any requirements for archaeological review in this instance, because the letter from the consultant did outline that there's a higher possibility of archaeological matter in this area. So I would discourage the board from completely eliminating that condition.
And we also have the issue of precedence. I mean, this is going to come up again, so we have to be consistent.
There's some, not to scare anyone, but there's some state statutes on this that, involve criminal prosecution for touching certain types of, I don't want to say exactly what it is, but it's very important as to why that condition should remain. There is a possibility of a misdemeanor. It's a criminal offense to touch any of those sort of materials.
Does that really deal with any construction? Because if you found
Not-
bones or something, that's always in any general contractor has to deal with.
Yeah, but this has been specifically identified as being within the zone, so the state statute applies.
Okay, because just recently, we also removed that from the requirement for the Parks and Recreation along Waverly Road because we thought it was unnecessary with the amount of digging that had already happened. So, and also in the Sailboat Bend apartments over there, the sign that was put up, we also did not require it there. So there's times when we've said, no, it's not necessary. And so I don't know if
So like I mentioned, we require the archaeology review with major ground disturbing work. So with the demolitions, new construction, major alterations that, would go into a depth of a couple feet at least. And in general, we haven't required that for fences or for signage. Like Shari is mentioning, there are state statutes, there's also federal statutes that relate to archaeology that would apply in certain circumstances. And for Rivermont, the archaeology review wasn't totally eliminated. The purpose of that review was regarding the fact that it would cause an adverse effect to the archaeological site that's designated in that location, but the board permitted that to proceed with the landscaping that was proposed with archaeological monitoring. So it wasn't removed.
So does that mean that there is a lesser review that could occur that, like you're suggesting that we didn't remove it, but it was a little less cumbersome? Like, is that?
With Rivermont, it was really, it was causing an adverse effect to the site because it would be destroying aspects of the archaeological site. So staff for that instance was saying it shouldn't proceed. There should be an alternative method incorporated, but the board approved the application to proceed with the installation of landscaping, but required monitoring, archaeological monitoring of the process to install the landscaping. But that is a little bit different because it's a designated archaeological site. And when, in those circumstances, we are looking to maintain the archaeological site and to not cause an adverse effect. And so that's why staff reviewed it in that way. In this situation, we are doing an archaeological review of the property as they're doing ground disturbing work. The ground disturbing work is really in certain locations where they're putting their footers. So it's limited in scope. It's also in the same locations where, the building sits today. So it's a little bit more limited in scope versus a full demolition or a total new construction project that would probably have more site work involved. So it's not as extensive as some other studies.
Right, and that's what I was pointing out when you had that sign for the Sailboat Bend buildings or the condominiums over there, that was already kind of previously disturbed. And if you're only raising the house, you're really only disturbing the land underneath the house, which has already been disturbed.
Right.
So it's, to me, almost unnecessary. But if you were doing more demolition and doing more work, yeah, I could see it being more of an issue or consideration. But in this case, think it's unnecessary.
I'm going to weigh in here since I haven't yet. I want to congratulate you on staying in Sailboat Bend and raising the house, which certainly sets a great example for your neighbors. And I see where you have to, and it's wise in the long run to do that. I have a hard time getting him back of being in favor of getting rid of the archaeological study because we do that on every single project. So I have a hard time, maybe I'm too concerned about precedent, but we have to treat all of the clients who come before us in an equal way. So unfortunately, it sounds like you probably will have to do this, but you've gone a long way in doing everything else.
Well, thank you. I will say that, I know your job is to help preserve communities like Sailboat Bend. And when you have a community like that that has so much history there, and we have flooding issues that are not going to be resolved from the city for another couple years, because we've had many meetings with them where they said that you're on the list, but it's going to be, it's like a $42 million project. Asking people to raise their homes on their own dime and then have to pay for additional studies and all this other, all that's going to do is deter other people from doing what we're trying to do. So I just wanted to say that, because I understand everything you guys are saying. I understand the importance of it. But I guess if I was tearing down a house and rebuilding a bigger house and, you know, really disturbing the ground in a different manner, I could understand it. But if I'm staying within my footprint, I'm not moving that house up, back, left, or right. You know, it's just a deterrent to other people who may want to stay in that community and fix up their homes by doing it this way. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay, thank you.
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
I'm confused. To what end does the archaeological study provide? So they do a study. What do they tell these people? You can't raise your house now because A, B, or C?
They're looking for things.
Well, what do they find, and how does that affect their ability or
know.
not ability
We
to
don't
do what they
know.
want to do?
So the testing can make a determination on information about the past. And it would include, there would be a report that would include information about what would be needed as they proceed through their project as far as monitoring is concerned. So in some cases, it can give a property owner the
You mean
benefit.
during construction?
Correct, yeah. The benefit of additional information as far as sensitivity to the site in finding archaeological material.
Okay, so,
it would
but-
limit the scope on any future monitoring. I will preface this with, I am not an archaeologist. I am sensitive to it and have a consideration for it, and it is part of our requirements as a certified local government and the requirements within our code. So it's something we enforce.
I'm trying to respect all of the law. I'm trying to respect the regard for future and Arthur's position, but at the same time, I just don't see how it makes any sense to delay or stop these people from raising their house up in a flood zone when they've got more than enough proof to show that if they don't get this thing up in the air,
I think you're mistaken. I don't think this is going to stop them from raising
it
the
has the
house.
potential to stop it, does it
They're
not?
looking to find whatever artifacts they can find when this, excuse me, the soil is disturbed.
And then
And
what?
obviously, the only time it's disturbed is when they're doing
What if they
construction.
Okay, so then what? Then what happens when they find those artifacts?
Yeah.
That's my point.
So there's
They find
certain
them.
things that they have to treat them a certain way under the law. So for example, if they find human bones, that's a felony to mess around with those bones, that kind of thing. So I'm just trying to, I didn't want to say that, but the point
I mean,
is there's
I
bones.
respect all
There
that,
could be
but
bones of
again,
human
it's going
beings,
to
there could
delay.
be, I'm not sure what it is, but it's very regulated under the law what you can do with those types of bones.
Okay,
But if a
so,
builder or somebody doing construction came across bones, they're
have-
regulated by law to do something with that.
No, they can't do anything.
Well, they're regulated by law to take
Do
X,
something.
Y, and Z steps. So by not doing this archaeological study, it is not going to prevent that from occurring.
No, I think the difference here is that in that instance, we don't know whether or not there's something there. Here, it's been identified that there are things there that could include human bones, animal bones, whatever it is. So that's the issue, is that we know for sure there's something there. That's why it's identified as being in the zone.
I wanted to jump in here. Since you've said earlier that this is a law that is part of what we're doing here, we can't vote it down, can we? We can't vote against it.
I don't recommend
I understand
voting
that.
the other way. I can't
know.
force you to do anything.
I
can only
understand.
Arthur,
advise you,
question.
you know.
Can we strike the word in this number 6, required, and replace it with suggested? So that we're,
I wouldn't because of I don't think we can. Because of what the city attorney just said.
Did you say that the city has a plan to do something in the area that will
No.
raise these houses in the future? A $40 million project?
No, just to fix the flooding,
Okay.
yeah.
Is this a tough one? It's a very tough one. It really is.
I don't think it is. I mean, I sympathize with the homeowners, but I think we have to go with what the law says here.
But I go back
And
to
also
where they
what-
bought their home.
But what we do.
Where was the archaeological inspection study or
I can't-
investigation when they bought their
I can't
property?
answer that.
Exactly.
Because, well,
That
when they
should be
bought their home, they
required to
weren't
be told.
disturbing the soil. They were buying a house that was intact, so there would be no archaeological survey
Just-
required.
Just to be clear, you know, we worked with the board on putting notice in the property appraiser as to whether or not it's historic, but that hasn't been done yet, as far as this is concerned. But, you know, we could always talk about that at another time, but that's not a part of the criteria that you're reviewing as to whether or not they knew or didn't know. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. So I
Exactly.
just suggest we
That's not
stick to the criteria as to what's before you, and whether or
That's not
not
a
it
law.
meets whether or not it meets the criteria before you. I suggest we stick to that, and then you find that it does or it doesn't meet the criteria.
Right.
As to whether they knew or didn't know or how expensive it is, that is not under your purview.
Right.
And there's
How
more
about
ignorance.
expediting? If we had our backs against the wall and said, okay, we're not going to strike or suggest that we strike this archaeological review, how fast can that happen in real time? So these people can get their house moving
It
forward.
depends on the consultant and what his schedule is. You can't answer that now. I mean.
What's
I
your
wouldn't-
experience with
I-
that, Richard?
I wouldn't answer for anybody else, but
All right, as I indicated earlier, it is an outside consultant, and it depends on who you can find and whether or not their availability to do the consulting on the project for them. In the studies that I've had done, there was very limited information that was gained from it, and it was typically information that had already been established or existed within the community. Because this property, as I've indicated before, is the ground underneath is being disturbed and has already been disturbed, just as like on other properties where we've said it's already been disturbed, why are we requiring it again? They may not have been looking for archaeological stuff before, but it's already been disturbed, and who knows what's happened. Sometimes it's not based necessarily on bones of humans or animals. It's sometimes based on clay pottery or live, living organisms that grew for, hundreds of years prior to this, and you're kind of gathering information so that you build that database. But as I said, I kind of have a concern for why we're repeatedly doing things on existing properties that have already
I'd
been
like to
disturbed.
comment on something you just said. You said that the ground was already disturbed. The only time it was disturbed is when the house was built 100 years ago. I understand that. But I'm listening to our city attorney, and I think that's something to take in mind. Does anyone else on the board have anything?
No, I'm just trying to establish whether our hands are tied on this matter or not. That's my concern. Because if they're not, I'd like to not do it. But if they are, we really have no choice in the matter.
I mean, we put motions forward that don't include all the staff criteria every
But this is
week.
different. These are statutes.
I understand if it
Yeah.
was, I mean, I think that
Yeah.
we do that regularly.
I don't.
I would discourage the board from completely eliminating anything as far as archaeological review. What is outlined is best practices for this situation. The very bare minimum for archaeology review is monitoring of the ground disturbing work, but in that instance, you're not, it's a little bit of a disservice to the property owner.
I
as
also
far as
would-
not providing the
All
information
right, can you
ahead
answer,
of
what's the
time.
difference between the monitoring versus the consultant coming in and doing their work?
The consultant would prepare the survey ahead of time. They would take samples around the site where the work is going to be occurring and provide a preliminary report to say monitoring is required during this time of the construction. It's in these locations only. It's not required, so it's a preliminary assessment. If you're only doing monitoring and you're not getting that preliminary assessment, you may actually spend more time monitoring at the end of the day rather than getting that preliminary information to understand which locations are more sensitive on the site. If there's monitoring, if it's strictly just monitoring, it's more everywhere where there's ground disturbance.
And I wanted to add something to the discussion, that I have a real concern about getting rid of this stipulation for an archaeological study, because what are you going to do the next time a neighbor comes through and they say, well, you did it for them, why don't I get it? So I think we're starting, I've been here a number of years and I've served on other boards, and that's a path you don't want to go down, because there's nothing to stick your hands on and say, you know, this is the way we should do it. And because we're going on emotion at that point.
All right, but I'm saying we've already done that several times since I've been on the board. So,
Not for the archaeological study.
yes, we have with the Rivermont, where we did it on the road, and we did it at the Sailboat Bend condominiums over there, where they were putting a sign. So we've already said twice that we didn't need it.
I don't recall that ever happening since I've been here. I've been here 5.5 years. I don't recall that being in a staff report and completely removed. I don't recall that.
Well, it was never on the staff report, even though there was digging for the sign, and they did not require it when it was completely new disturbed ground. So,
I can only state what has happened since I've been here, and a case before you that's in a staff report where it says it's in an archaeologically significant zone and saying there should be a study. I have not seen that ever removed by the board. And the question is, the criteria that's in front of you that I suggest that you take a look at, the question is whether you want to keep it or not. You should talk about that criteria and the basis for it. In that criteria, it doesn't mention cost or whether or not somebody knew. I just suggest that you look at that and just make your decision based on what the criteria says in the code.
So that particular sign discussion that we had, I think she's right. I do not believe it was in the staff report, and I believe it was because the land had already been disturbed. So I think the significant piece here, for me at least, that's been said here is that the land, they are taking an existing property that has already been, a footprint that has already been disturbed and raising it, and so they're not disturbing new property, disturbing new land. So I think it is similar in instance, and agree with Richard that there is precedent that we have done this in the past.
There is a difference between the installation of a sign versus the
Right.
construction of a property that's elevating a property 4 feet. Your footers are going to be a lot more in depth, and there's a lot more frequency. So there is a major difference between the amount of ground disturbing work that is required for this scope. And staff takes that into consideration in reviewing anything. And on that sign in particular, it was part of a large development that required a lot of site work at the time. A sign, again, doesn't require as much ground disturbing work as a new construction project or a demolition project or something more extensive.
Okay. Can we call a question here? I mean,
Did the owners have another comment?
Well, I had a question about number 3 on the list,
Okay.
about the color of stucco foundation. What?
My name's Gary Muzichuk. I'm also owner of the property. Hello, everyone. I think according to the design guidelines of the historic district, painting the home of any color is the owner's choice, and number 3 on there shows that we need to paint the bottom part of the structure a different darker color than the house. Can you please tell us why that is?
That's something that's included in the National Park Service guidelines that are issued for elevating structures and flood mitigation as a recommendation to help disguise the elevation of the structure. So by painting the bottom portion, it's helping to recede it more into the overall perceived elevation of the structure overall, where it assists the visibility of the overall height versus what it is today. So you're increasing the height by 4 feet. If you have it all painted the same color, white, for example, you would see a larger residential structure. If you paint the bottom portion in a darker color, it's going to recede into the background and be not as visible to the viewer as far as seeing that change in elevation. So that was something that was included in the design guidelines and is appropriate in this situation. But you're right, it's not something that the board typically mandates as far as color, and we're not suggesting any particular color just by implementing some sort of transition between the existing home and the new foundation. So there is differentiation.
And she is suggesting that there's plant material in front of it anyway,
Yeah.
so it may not be significant when it comes down to the final product.
Yeah, the landscaping would probably hide whatever color you have there. Do you have any other questions? No?
I still have one
Oh, you
clarification. I'm sorry, but this is important stuff for all of us. They are going to pay for this archaeological study. Do they choose who does it, or is it a recommendation by the city and they pay that person or company?
They can choose who they'd
So they
like to
go out
do it
and
as long
find,
as it's a
they find someone
qualified.
who's licensed and qualified by the state law to do
That's a
so.
qualified archaeologist, correct?
All right. Are you guys already in search of an archaeological study?
No, because we didn't even know we had to do
Okay.
this, so.
All right, and just to be clear, that's all. And when they elevate your home, how much disturbance, looking at this photograph here, and I'm sorry to everyone waiting to go home that I'm asking these simple questions, but when the engineering of this, the home gets lifted up in the air, obviously, and so they have to get underneath the entire footprint of your home and disturb the entire footprint of your home to install a new elevation of the home. So they'll be taking out the existing foundation, replacing it with something much stronger to push it up in the air. Is that correct?
Yeah, they use steel beams, right?
Yeah, partially to lift it, they use.
Yeah,
steel
so there's a
with
lot of
I-beams,
activity going on
hydraulics,
underneath the footprint of your home.
And then a curb
Okay.
wall is
Yeah.
replacing
There's a
the,
lot of activity under the house because raccoons live under there, so
And there's also,
they've been disturbing
the
the,
structure's kind of funky, the way it's sort of half resting on a beam in the front.
yeah.
But maybe that
Okay.
was the flooding.
Thank
Anyway,
you for clarifying that.
Okay,
that's a file cabinet,
does, okay,
the front porch there, the
Oh,
beam is a
yeah.
file.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would anyone like to make a motion? Since I can't.
I want to see these people go forward. We make the motion to approve this as is. They are committed to the archaeological inspection. They can't appeal to the commission?
So these applications are subject to the call-up, so the commission can call it up, and, you know, if they have any issues, they can always appeal as well.
So they could go to their commissioner and say, by the way, we got approved, but we still have a problem with this archaeological study. Is there anything that the commission could do?
The commission can call it up, and they can change the conditions if they feel it's necessary. They always can do that.
Although, wouldn't the first person they call be Tricia?
Yeah, but she's already talking to Tricia.
You've already
She already got Tricia's answer. I'm trying to get them the answer they want. That's,
I can't do
it's
that.
my mission right now at the moment. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that, so everybody leaves here knowing that we did our best to
So would
make
you like to make
it
a
right.
motion, Tim?
I'm having a hard time making a motion to approve it, but I would like to ask the owners, do you understand that it looks like it's impossible to disapprove this condition for an archaeological inspection in order for you to move forward, to raise your home, to get what you want, although it's not fun, this is going to take longer and more expensive than what you anticipated.
Yeah, I don't
And,
know.
and
what
you
our-
understand that, and you were prepared that that was most likely, could be a very strong possibility.
We have very few options.
Okay. Well, if you're okay with it, then I'll make the motion to approve the case. Would you help me with that, please?
Tim. Page 5.
Motion to approve the resolution for a certificate of appropriateness for major alterations under case number UDP HP 23025, located at 915 Southwest Second Court, based on the followings and findings of fact. And Sherry?
Do you want to do the findings of fact based on the staff report?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And do you want to include all the conditions on page 5 of the staff report?
I do, and they understand the paint job is truly, makes sense in a way. To me, it makes a lot of sense. It's not really an issue.
Okay, and I'm being told by a wonderful staff member that I just met today that there is a typo on number 6 of the conditions on the staff report. It should read elevation instead of demolition on line 4, right below where it says be submitted. So that's condition number 6. It should be elevation instead of demolition. That's cool, Tricia? Okay, all right. Is that,
Okay.
do you accept that change for the conditions, Tim?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Do we have a
Do
second?
we have a second?
Are we allowed to ask a question? For
Not-
number?
not while
No?
we're
Oh,
voting, I'm sorry.
okay.
I'll second it.
What was that?
I seconded the motion.
You seconded the motion. Okay. Should we do a roll call? No more discussion.
Mr. Bray?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
No.
Mr. Chavon?
Yes.
Ms. Walker?
No.
And Chair Marcus?
Yes.
Passed 3-2.
Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Can I make a comment at this time? Sure. As far as single-family homes in Sailboat Bend, I'm not sure how many, if you have a number of how many single-family homes are contributing homes in Sailboat Bend. I think the number is probably less than 50.
I don't know. We have to ask the staff.
I would, well, it's a low number, and the historic district, as it stands, historically, has been neglected by the city as far as infrastructure, and if you look at most cities, a historic district carries a higher property value than most other places in the city, and the challenges that a homeowner of a wood frame home, which all of them would be going back pretty much, for the most part, 100 years, is extensive, especially with what we're seeing now with weather conditions changing and our home nearly flooding several times. So everything we're doing here with the Historic Preservation Board and preserving Sailboat Bend is the historic district, which came about under circumstances that weren't, I mean, you all are probably familiar how Sharon Wilkin went around addressing people with shopping carts, homeless people getting to sign a petition. The whole thing came about under, illogical ways. So the fact that we are stuck in this predicament and the district is, it is what it is. I just can't really understand why single-family homeowners aren't getting more support from the city, and the district isn't getting more support from the city, and, you know, that a homeowner of a small group of homes that it's so worth protecting is in a position such as we are. And I think, you know, something really needs to be done about the district and the way it's being approached by the city, and anything the board can do to help that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Okay, we have one more case before us, and that is UDP HPD 23001, 1301 South Andrews Avenue, AKA 1313 South Andrews Avenue. And Trish, would you like to do the staff report?
There's not much of a staff report. In this case,
be right
there was a motion, oh, if you leave, Arthur, we lose quorum. Okay, we're going to have to pause.
Oh, you lose quorum.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
That's okay, Arthur.
you
We
wanna
gotta go to the
pause?
bathroom for a
Okay,
minute.
I'm sorry.
We'll just take a few minute break.
Report, and then we'll do disclosures.
Sure. So this isn't much of a report. It's more just a summary of your last meeting, where there was a motion from the Historic Preservation Board to place consideration to initiate historic landmark designation application for the Frank Croissant residence at 1301 South Andrews Avenue, which is also known as 1313 South Andrews Avenue, and a request to invite the property owner here to have that discussion. As outlined in the memo that's provided to the board, there are options for initiating a designation application request. One is through a motion of the Historic Preservation Board. Another is through a motion of the City Commission. The property owner themselves can submit a designation application, or a nonprofit organization with a vested interest in historic preservation could also submit the request. There are several criteria outlined on page 2 of the staff report that a designation application would need to fulfill at least one of those to be considered for historic designation. And the board would have to make that finding if they would like to initiate a designation application as part of the discussion tonight.
Thank you. And first, we'll just do disclosures. Ashley?
No disclosures.
Been by the property many times.
I've driven by the property.
No disclosure.
Okay. Please, introduce yourself.
I have a disclosure. I'm not related to Mr. Marcus, but my name is Ira Marcus. And I'd like to thank the board and Tricia Logan for working with us and inviting us here today. A little correction, there are 2 parcels on a unified portfolio. One of them is 1301, and the building that you're looking at is 1313. Okay. So we are the owner of the building. My entity owns the building. We have every intention of designating it as historic. Mr. Shackney, our renowned architect, has already done a lot of the groundwork, and the application is virtually ready to be filed. And thanks for Trish for working with Mr. Shackney. I am a firm believer in historic preservation. I'm from Boston, and there hasn't been enough done, in my opinion, in the city, but thank you for all your hard work. So we plan to submit this application very, very shortly. But I would like, if it's appropriate to ask a question, would there be any difference if the board initiated it as opposed to us initiating it? Is there any difference in the outcome or the effect? Does it affect the transferable development rights?
No, the only difference is who is the applicant for the request. So if the board were to initiate the designation application, the city of Fort Lauderdale becomes the applicant and assumes the responsibility for moving the item forward. So staff would prepare the designation application and then schedule it for the Historic Preservation Board and the City Commission and provide notices along the way. If the property owner submits the designation application, of course, you're responsible for preparing all the materials, providing the board copies of the application, and providing the application fee and any required notices.
So if the city or the board submits it, we don't have to pay the $650 fee?
That's correct.
We
Also,
save you money.
You wouldn't have to pay a consultant to do the historic report.
Don't get me started.
But I want to know from Tricia, are there any downsides if the owner of the property does not apply?
In this scenario, it appears that the property owner, at least of the 1313 South
Yeah.
Andrews property, is supportive of the request and would like to see it move forward either way. And it goes through the same process. It's just the fact that staff prepares the application and the city becomes the applicant.
I have a question, if it's appropriate. The fine gentleman sitting in the row is my neighbor. His name is Don Benson, and he and another partner of his own the building to the north at 1301. There's an issue, not really an issue, but we share the parking lot that's on the south side of our building through a condominium structure. If we are approved for historic designation, does that affect at all the parking arrangement that we have or the situation?
I don't think so.
Designation would not affect parking. So in this scenario, since there's multiple structures on one site, and that's the way that it's described within its legal description. Unless directed otherwise or provided with additional information, the designation would encompass the whole folio per the code. So that would be the application that staff would prepare. If there's a directive to just designate the portion of the parcel that encompasses 1313 South Andrews, that would be something that we would need an additional legal description prepared to describe what is exactly being considered for designation. But in this case, the legal description describes the total area.
In that regard, we've already anticipated that, and Mr. Shackney, through assistance, we've already have separate site plans or surveys for both properties. So we have a designated boundary for 1313.
Okay. So, just curious, after hearing all this, do you have any way you'd like to go in terms of applying for designation yourself or letting the city?
Can I borrow $650 from you?
I don't have it on me.
No. I'll chat with my partner in the building, but the 650 is not that significant.
Well, there's a little more than that, but yeah.
Oh.
Well, no, you'd
I
have to
wanna
pay
see the
somebody
fine
to,
print.
you have to do a historic report. So maybe your architect can do
We
that.
already, Trish, could you please correct me if I'm wrong?
Is this,
We already have a report that I believe that we would append,
Yeah.
that the city graciously has done, that we would append to the application. Am I correct?
yeah, the historic structure form file.
Well, so Mr. Shackney has taken some of the information that we have prepared from a past survey and combined it together to create a draft application, but it has not been submitted yet to the city.
Yeah, Stan Shackney, architect. There's already a narrative written, there's already a whole supplement written. So basically, Trish said we could basically use that as our backup. But we have the photographs, the drawings, the site plan, surveys, and all the other documentation ready to
Do you
go.
have any, you need to get some historic photographs also, if you could.
Yeah, well, I've done, they asked for current photographs, and now
Oh,
we've already
okay.
done that. We don't have to do historical.
Okay.
I have a question. If we, we're also in the process of selling the building, but I've committed that even if we're not through the process yet, I've committed that the buyer will have to commit to the historic designation. So I want everybody to feel comfortable about that. But just a question, let's assume either myself or the new buyer wants to paint the building. Do they have to come, once it's designated, do they have to come before the board?
Trish, in terms of painting the building a color?
Painting, we don't require a certificate of appropriateness for exterior painting.
Okay, right answer.
Anything else? By the way, if anyone has not been inside the building, when I bought it in 2004, we totally renovated the inside, and it's really very, very nice.
Great. What is it used for inside, if I may ask?
Right now, there's a law office in there.
Oh, okay, okay. Good. Does anyone have any more questions?
Don, did you want to say something?
You're done.
I was done before I started.
Oh, I didn't, yeah, after this, yeah. Okay, no, we're just talking amongst ourselves. Would you like to speak?
Yes, please.
Please.
Thank you.
Don't do that. And please introduce yourself.
My name is Don Benson, and as he is aptly defined, I am in the next building that is all connected with a condominium agreement that we all have. Not only are the two buildings connected in that manner, the parking lots, there's two parking lots there that are also connected in that manner. My concern and my thoughts about being here today, and Dr. Casereta, who owns the other portion of the white building or the northern building, can't be here today because he's in New York, is that notice was sent, including the 1301 building. I own of the portfolios, 3 of them. Dr. Casereta owns 2 of them in the white building. They're divided in condominium type arrangements. With that in mind, we all have access to the 2 parking areas. My concern as far as the white building is concerned, it was done in 1975 and built in the manner that it was built because of a parking issue. The city required certain parking. With that in mind, I don't want the 1301 building be designated as a historical site, but their building, I think, has the age where it qualifies for it.
Well, how old is the 1301 building?
I think it's 1975. You have my papers.
Okay.
He has all my.
We're only talking about the 1313 building. That's the one we really meant.
But does the application, this includes all of it, right, Tricia?
That's what it looks like.
Currently, yes, because it is legally described in its entirety. But if directed to only prepare an application for that southern half of the parcel, then staff would need to obtain a legal description of that southern half. The property owner does have that in their possession, but we would need a directive if the board were to vote on initiating a designation application, that's the only area that should be included.
1313.
Correct.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
It's just that it's not legally described that way within our property reporter.
Okay.
And within its folio.
So
forgive me.
Please go ahead.
I was going to go with a question that I had based upon what does or does not happen to the 1313 building as to how it would affect the 1301 building. My concern is, A, because of the age, not thinking that it would even qualify, but I don't want that building to be restricted to any historical requirements that may be required for the type of building that IRA has. Painting, working, reconstruction, or anything like that. If the designation is going to end up only be for their building and not for the parking lots and not for the white building, the 1301 building, I guess the question I'm trying to get is that the case? Is that what's going to happen?
Whatever's legally described within the designation application, once approved and adopted, if it goes down the path and it's approved by the city commission, whatever ultimately is improved as part of that legal description at that time is what is considered designated. And any requirements of the historic building would only be required within that area that's designated, not another parcel.
So
The only thing that's
Go ahead.
slightly different is if there's a new development on the adjacent parcel, and you have a designated historic landmark, staff would review the new development application and make any comments as part of a development review committee application to state what kind of effects may be applied to the historic structure. And maybe make some recommendations as far as what should be modified, if anything, to reduce those effects. And then there's usually a requirement for just a presentation in front of the Historic Preservation Board to show what the project is. But that's only in the event you were to redevelop that parcel into something different. So you were going to demolish the 1301 building and want to build something new in that location, then we would have a review.
I wanted to get back to just, in order for the applicant to be clear, if we vote on it today, which you're unsure of, so we may want to, hold off on doing anything, we could just say we're voting on the 1313 South Andrews building as the applicant could if they bring that forward, rather than, it sounds like the
Yeah,
whole
I-
property is included right now.
I mean, sure, I can weigh on it a little bit more, but you would need to specifically state that you're interested in designating the 1313 South Andrews structure and the southern half of the parcel, or the southern portion of the parcel. And we would have to work on getting a legal description together that would be proposed as part of the designation application that would come back before the Historic Preservation Board.
So
Because the original intent, I think, in the designation of 1313 only and not the entire property,
Right.
much like the Hyatt building downtown, was just the round structure and not the adjoining properties that were part of that complex. So I think that that's the route we're taking. It's only the building itself.
So you would have to state what you would like staff to do, whether it's the building or the building with the entire site. You just have to make sure you make that clear for the record, and that's it.
That
Okay.
was going to be one of my questions. Is that based upon what you
Speak,
just said?
speak into the mic, please.
That's going to be one of my questions, based upon what I just heard then. If the designation is going to be for the building, it may also then be for the parking lot connected to that building, because there's one south of it and one north of it that's in our condo.
So the issue is that normally when you ask for a designation, it automatically includes the site upon which the building is on. So in the legal description of that particular building, if it includes the parking lot or whatever else is there, then that would include the entire site. However, if you limit it and you say, okay, I only want the building, then you just have to provide a legal description, or staff. It just depends on the directive that the board gives, or if the board wants to let you all do it yourself, whatever it is they choose to do today. But it just depends. You just have to be very specific as to what you're asking for.
Okay, good. So the one question I have for you, the applicant, is, do you want to continue this to the board today? Do you want us to vote on this? Or are you looking to continue it because you're not sure which way you'd like to go at this point?
I'm not, thank you for asking the question. I'm not really sure what specifically you would be voting on. So for clarity, if I may pose this, is the question that would be posed to be voted on is whether the city should take up the designation?
That's your decision. That's total, am I
Well,
correct?
it's not his, actually, so.
No? Well, you've
Under
already
our,
had this.
under our codes, though, there's a few different ways that the
Right.
property can possibly, when we can initiate an application for designation. So we have the way where the board basically does a motion and says, this property, we'd like, it to be initiated, the designation application, and then staff would be working on that, and that would be, the applicant would be the city. And then the other way to do it is the property owner. They would file the application and pay whatever appropriate fees. And then, of course, the other ways that we mentioned before, which is the nonprofit, et cetera.
I think in the best interest is, I think we would ask as a continuance to give us time to do our package, which we basically have ready, to submit, and let us take the charge in this.
Not my decision, it's the board.
So whatever the appropriate.
Please speak into the mic, I'm sorry.
Whatever the appropriate way to bring this to your attention is, can we table this or defer it? And with the understanding that it would be the owner's intention for us to file this application, and we will be doing so very shortly.
Okay.
Just to clarify, if you accept that the owners are going to file the application, you don't need to table this. There's nothing more to be said. They just have to go directly to DSD and file their application. So there's nothing for you to do, but if you want to, but I'm just saying that,
We don't have to take any action then?
no, you don't
Okay.
have to. It's only if the city wants to do it, that's
Right.
it, so.
I would suggest that we postpone this until the October meeting, giving the applicant for the property, or us as the applicant, time to have further discussion and come back and
that would be
decide
a
which
con-
way you'd like to proceed.
We've made the decision,
Yeah.
Mr. Bray, and so we're going to file it. When do you think we'll file it?
Okay.
Oh, we need a letter, oh my, there he is. We
You know,
just
and-
need a letter from our partner
Okay.
next door approving our application.
So if
Is
it's
that
your
what it is?
intent to do this.
I'm sorry?
That if it's your intent to do this, as you're saying, then we have nothing more to do here.
Then it's been a
So-
pleasure
But
seeing you.
I want to, and we will have a pleasure again of seeing you when you come back to the board.
Come back and then we'll have a ceremony designating it and we'll invite you all in.
Okay. Thank. Oh, okay. Win it for all of us.
Thank you for your time. And
Thank
by the
you.
way, thank you for preserving history.
Thank you for preserving your little bit of history. Yes, you may. And with that, we have, for the good of the city, are there any communications to the city commission? I know. And then we have for the good of the city, and we have a representative from Public Works to speak here. Thank you for sitting through our entire meeting.
We have the Director of Public Works, Alan Dodd, with us.
Hello.
Good evening. So the question I was asked to come talk about is stormwater improvements in Sailboat Bend. However, I will say that stormwater and flooding problems are not just a Sailboat Bend issue, but they're an issue in many, many neighborhoods in the city. So if you look at our capital improvement plan, which is where funding is designated within Sailboat Bend, really we have 3 projects right now. The first one is an ongoing project already funded for a little under $250,000 to put in an outfall at Argyle Drive. Construction is supposed to start in October this year and be finished in January of 2024 to help to drain the most western portion of Sailboat Bend. We have a project that's slated in 2026 for just under $850,000 to do improvements along the central portion of West Las Olas Boulevard. It's just more catch basins where there's low areas and help it to direct it towards the river. Now, the big project that we are working on is, this is one of the neighborhoods that's identified for Tranche 2 in the Stormwater Master Plan, the large neighborhood projects. And it's about a $20 million project that is right now planned to start design in 2025, and it would be a 2 to 3 year design process followed by construction, and that would be lumped in with probably 7 or 8 neighborhoods. Following the April floods, we've been asked to see if there's ways to accelerate those larger neighborhood projects, which is something we're working on. We're right now trying to develop a task order with our stormwater consultant to start that design effort in early part of fiscal year 2024, so in the fall, to start design on that. And it would be about a 2-year process for design and permitting, at which time it would compete with all of the other neighborhoods that are being, have been requested to be accelerated. And then we'd see where it'd fall out for construction later on. But that would probably bring the construction a few years ahead of when it's currently planned. But big picture, that's where the money is going into this neighborhood for stormwater improvements.
Anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I just noticed even this past week that I think where the area you're referring to at Southwest 15 Terrace, there was a significant tree that tumbled over because of the water that's been accumulated in that area. And so that's also a problem for the community where you have these historical trees that exist, and when you're not addressing the floodwaters, that more of these will come down and be destroyed in the process too. And if you're not sure what I'm referring to, I do have a picture. That's also true in the archaeological midden, where the water has been accumulating at the riverfront, and again, nothing is being done to address the accumulation of water there. I have noted several areas in the district which repeatedly has accumulation of water, and there is no drainage whatsoever. And so we have applicants here that are indicating that their homes are being destroyed as a result, and nothing has been done for years. So that's one of the concerns that we have, that we want to preserve things, but you're not really providing the homeowners or the property owners the ability to preserve their properties by not addressing these issues. So, I mean, we're putting a double standard on them, in other words, and I don't know how else to say that we need to escalate that. This is the oldest community in the city, and yet nothing's being addressed.
So specifically about the trees, we did have the urban forester go and look at them today. They are being impacted by groundwater levels. And though we did have a truck that went down and took water off the street, the groundwater levels are so elevated that you'll continue to see degradation of trees in this area because it's impacting the roots. That will continue to get worse as we look at the impacts of sea level rise. As you know, we are seeing higher tides. We've had a little under 9 inches of sea level rise since 1992, and we're projected to have 21 to 40 inches of sea level rise over the next 50 years, basically by 2070. That is causing us to change our standards for seawalls. It's causing us to change the design for stormwater infrastructure because it will not drain the way that the systems are currently designed. And at some point in time, this neighborhood will require a pump station to drain water out because it will not be able to work using gravity.
Right, so how do we accomplish, like I said, we've had 2 applicants before us that have demolitions and issues with water intrusion on their properties. One at Cooley's Landing, because the seawall is not being addressed, and one further in that, again, just the lack of drainage.
So as I said, okay, this is one of many neighborhoods that are doing that. I spent the entire morning on the phone talking to different residents who had flooding problems over just this past weekend, and that probably consumes 70 to 80% of my time is dealing with flooding issues. The stormwater utility takes in, this next year, it's projected to take in around $29 million. After we pay for our staff, the operation and maintenance of the stormwater system, it leaves about $7 million a year for capital improvements. And so this neighborhood, which is a relatively small one, is a $20 million project. When you look at 20 other neighborhoods that are larger that also require stormwater improvements to this level or worse, Melrose Manors is another one with no stormwater infrastructure. We're projecting that's going to be a $40 million price tag to construct the improvements there. We are doing the best that we can with the resources that we have available and trying to prioritize which neighborhoods will be next in the queue for improvements.
How
But
long-
probably half the city requires it, and the overall bill will probably exceed $1 billion by the time we are done.
How old is Melrose Parks? What's the history in that community?
The age of it?
Yeah.
I have no idea. It was annexed into the city, I believe, in the past 20 years, so it's a newer portion. It has 14 catch basins, if I remember right.
Okay, because I'm just saying, like, starting with the oldest and start going back, because those are the houses that are the oldest, so the most likely to have damage is a likely or logical way to start.
Yes. And Melrose Manors had extreme flooding damage during the flood. We have been prioritizing River Oaks. We have prioritized Edgewood, where we did have significant damage and no infrastructure. I will do whatever priorities the city commission gives me, but we cannot do the entire city at one time. We cannot afford to do it. There's not enough construction capacity to do it all at one time.
What's the requirement? Maybe Trish knows this. I mean, what's the requirement for seawalls? If one property does it, the adjoining properties need to do it within, what, a year, 2 years?
No, there is no requirement for adjacent properties. The requirement is if your seawall falls into disrepair, if it achieves the 50% threshold for reconstructing it, then you have to build it up to a higher standard. There's also requirements if you are causing flooding on the public right-of-way or your adjacent properties and get cited, you can be required to raise your seawalls.
Right, and that's the question, because this property that just came before us, if they raise their seawall and Cooley's Landing's right there, would you be required to raise your seawall because you would have intrusion going around their seawall and onto their property?
At the point that it impacts a neighboring property or impacts a public right-of-way, it can be cited, and then there is a process that follows that will require it to be raised at some point in accordance with the timelines that's in city ordinance.
Okay, and you would come up with the funding for that somehow?
It competes for the same pot of money. And the only way that can be changed is if the city commission raises the stormwater assessment rates.
is there an opportunity, I know that there's other cities in the world, like Amsterdam is one, that has created a way to tax tourists or something, to create a tax for raising money or funds for this very reason, to deal with the rising waters. And Barcelona is another city where they've created this, slight raise in tourist tax of some sort to obtain funds for addressing rising seawaters and drainage.
Taxes are regulated by the Florida legislature. They'd have to pass a law to change how taxes are done. The stormwater assessments are how this is done currently. So
The city
Florida
does have taxes,
legislature-
though.
Right, but the appropriate measure is under the stormwater assessments. That's how the money is obtained for this. If there is a different route, then that has to be done essentially through the Florida legislature.
And the stormwater assessment rate is based on two factors. One is the size of the pervious or impervious area, and there's also a percentage that's based on the number of trips. So hotels, multi-family units will drive more trips and therefore will drive a higher stormwater assessment rate.
Any other questions? Anyone else have any questions?
You're open to the public.
Do you have any questions while we're here? No? Okay. Thank you very much for sitting through the meeting and coming.
Oh, thank you very much.
We appreciate it. And with that, does anyone else have anything else?
For the good of the city?
Yes.
I just want to reiterate what the Stephanie and Gary and Stephanie said in closing, how, we have a situation here, we have ownership that's really passionate and really doing the right thing and trying to preserve their property, and they're asking the city for help. And I think our message to the city, and this has got nothing to do with staff or Tricia or anybody else, to our leadership in city, let's start to find ways to get more money on the table to help people keep their neighborhoods in a historic preservation condition. They need to the city needs to partner up with us and spend money on these things. We can't continue to ask ownership to cover all costs, all the work, everything. It's just, it doesn't work. It just won't work, because we run into this constantly. So I'm not saying that money fixes everything, but no money fixes nothing. So that's what I'm saying.
And with that, do we have a motion to dismiss?
I would like to just make one introduction of our new staff member, Simone Chin, over here.
Welcome.
Who's our new planner two in the Urban Design and Planning Division.
Oh, so there's a staff now.
Yes. Yes, we finally have help.
We're now plural. That's great.
Yeah.
Welcome. Thank you. And with that, do we have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second? Motion, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.